here with We Mortal Coils. All right, I was just reliably informed that this is episode 52. All right, so I guess the next one we're looking for is what, 54? Anyway, in my brain. But today, we are joined by Michael, Bray, Trevor, and myself, Stefan. How long has it been since we've done an episode?
It's been
It's been a while.
at least like 3 weeks, huh?
Yeah. You know, oh,
At least
okay.
3 weeks. Yeah, I
Sorry.
imagine so.
Yeah, I started pulling up dates here just to find out. But yeah, it's been a little while. We haven't recorded.
Yeah, it's been
Life
more than
gets
three
busy, man.
weeks.
Yeah, life gets busy. But nevertheless, it's good to see y'all.
Yeah,
Always good to see you.
like for the viewers and everything, play a little catch up here. I've just moved across the country. This is the first episode I'm doing in this house. I'm in a lawn chair, and it's that point. You know what I mean? I was getting shit out of my house, going like, will it travel? Is it worth it? Leave it. I mean, and if it didn't pass either one of those questions, it got left.
Mm.
And I know, Michael, I think you've just been moving, right?
Twice in like
Twice.
4 months. Yeah,
Wow. That's a
And
story
that's
there.
self-inflicted
Oh, man.
entirely.
But I mean, the gambler's fallacy, right? I mean, surely you didn't fall prey to it if you moved twice. If you moved to a first place and it didn't work out, move to another one for sure. I agree.
Oh, it
And I
was
know Bray's
phased.
looking at travel and whatnot. We did a pregame, catch up just a moment ago. But today we are looking at when is torture acceptable. So I've had to do several 12-hour drives, up and down from Illinois to Louisiana, just over and over again, the monotony. And I fall asleep at the wheel a lot. Okay, but I've gotten much better about it, here recently. Not recently, in the past 5 years, I've gotten really, much better about it. Switching between books and whatnot. So in between, like Jurassic Park and other titles that I'm always reading on the road, I read End of Faith finally by Sam Harris, and kind of weirdly placed in that book, but kind of not weirdly placed if you consider the time frame it was written. He introduces this topic of torture, and that had me thinking to myself, well, I need to talk about it with others. Not that we have any authority about when and where torture will be executed or anything like that, but I mean, the way that Sam Harris brought it up is really intriguing. So that's kind of where the topic comes from. So to begin, kind of like we always do, we need to figure out what is torture. I'm going to hand it off to one of my other coils here. Say, Michael, you're the first on my little screen here.
Okay.
But give us what you think a good working definition of torture might be.
It's the act of one human being upon the other of engaging in acts that are either psychologically or physically or both undesirable repeatedly over a period of time. Sometimes for the end of itself, and sometimes for the end of coercion.
That's not a bad one. It's not a bad one. The purposes included in the definition help a lot. And we're going to talk a lot about it. This episode, for many, torture is an end unto itself. Bray, do you think you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I'll give it a little bit of a different angle and say that torture, off the top of my head, would be any infliction of unnecessary pain, suffering, etc., intentionally inflicted upon another. Yeah, I think you could probably any intentional infliction of pain and suffering onto another individual. Probably, I guess you would have to put in sort of how Michael said about having some means or having the means in itself. But
I think you used the word unnecessary at one point, which is a frightening word, depending on the
I
context.
figured you might like that.
Yeah, because I can justify quite a lot of things. You can be quite vicious with that term. It could do a lot of lifting. I mean, there are a few wars happening right now that when we think of the term necessity, necessarily, if you want to rationalize something, just say that it's a necessity. Uh,
Right.
so
I
that's a
thought it
concerning
would be
thing.
a special tool that will help us later when we talk about collateral.
Ah,
True,
yes, yeah.
true. And Trevor, I want to say what came to my head about. Oh wait, what might Trevor say about this? And what came to mind was like there are acts between consenting adults that some people might consider torture that otherwise would be desirable. You know,
Oh,
and so like
well,
consent is a big issue, of course.
well, yeah, that's the whole thing. Yeah, so torture. So you were thinking in terms of what would Trevor say. So I'll say a very Trevor thing, and say that it just depends on the perceiver, really, and what you're
Sure.
into. Because like, I mean, if you have a safe word, then is it it's there's a certain that's a whole different other thing that we're talking about,
True, true.
separate
And I
and
bring it
often
up to
distinct.
say that we're going to probably try to ignore it, right?
Hmm.
We probably need to condense our definition, like at least for the terms of this episode. Like we're talking about, like Michael said, for its own purpose or coercion. That's
Hmm.
usually what we're going to be talking about here. We're not going to be talking
Yeah.
about anything consenting.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I like to have for torture as a term. I like to have an intentionally wet or a vague term for it because
Pardon?
really vague term. Uh,
The $1 million question is, what was Saddam Hussein's safe word?
oh
Precisely.
man, that man didn't have one. So I think you could use the word torture for all sorts of things. And I think whenever we explore this conversation, like is torture acceptable and all that sort of thing, I think what I'll probably come back to again and again as an introduction, and comes back to the definition, is to have an intentionally vague definition of it. I think that's important. The weight of it, I think, should be intentionally quite light. Like I think, for example, it's useful to think of like someone like a manager at a company intentionally doing some insert shitty thing here, and you can consider it torturous.
And
It's not
often it is.
torturous. Yes, it's not torturous in the same way that a car battery can be, and a pail of water, combined with a few other things, is torturous. However, nevertheless, I think it should be an intentionally vague term because it's quite applicable to a lot of things. I think Michael's definition was perfect. Necessity is not perfect because I mean, even someone who tortures out of necessity, he thinks or she thinks I mean, even they will admit that it is torture. So I think that's I think an intentional infliction of harm on another non-consensually. Uh, is probably the definition that you would need, either psychological or emotional or physical. I think all of that is more than applicable. Um, so the kind of leverage this a little bit. So it's intentionally vague, and I wanted to briefly mention when we speak about is torture acceptable. When we speak about it, my thought is always towards like the weight or the context of it. So when we talk about measurement, like is torture acceptable? I think it's in context to what the item is. Like, how are you doing it? Am I torturing you by making you stay an extra 15 minutes at the end of your shift to like wipe the floors? Like you could say yes, and you shouldn't do that, and I should go, and then I could go, well, I'm your manager, and if my manager comes in and he sees the floors are dirty tomorrow morning, and he is, then he'll fire both of us. So you can kind of it's a series of weights. I am in a sense torturing you in this context, but in the context of the greater situation, in terms of like the weight of the situation, can determine whether or not that thing is acceptable. To me, it's one of those things where it has to be a value judgment based on multiple aspects of the context.
I want to try for something here. I want to try and fiddle with the definition a little bit.
Sure.
Because we both split out. You and I, Trevor, we've split out that physical, mental, kind of barrier. I think torture, generally speaking, the goal is psychological harm, whether it's through a mental or a physical aim. But psychological
I
harm
like
is the actual core thing that you're trying to tap into, whether it's for sadistic or coercive reasons.
Well, so that's a really
Because
interesting
if you
question.
hurt, so from the sadistic side of things, if you're hurting somebody and they're a brick wall and it doesn't do anything, you're probably not getting your fun out of it. From the coercive side of things, if someone's a brick wall, you're not getting anything out of it.
Yeah. So my first thought on that is, well, and Bray talked about this just a moment ago. There is a difference here, and I think there is two different types of torture here. There's torture in the term of sadism. I enjoy harming you. That's torture. But there's also coercive torture to get to a desired result. For example, like during like the Gulag Archipelago era of like the Soviet Union and people spending their time in gulags, they were being tortured for information. Partly, I mean, I think partly also these people were sadists. These men and women,
That's who
the
you
blue
hire.
caps.
Yeah.
Yes,
I don't
certainly,
think
yeah.
it's
And I think
part
the
of it. I
sadists.
think it's a great deal of it.
It is sure,
Yeah,
sure.
you can have to be.
It's not. Yeah, it's not any one singular thing, of course. But I do think a lot of it we should take into consideration that it's not just sadism. It is very often like the way that like people that work for the Navy SEALs or. No, that's not a good example. Just somebody who works for like the American military, whose job it is to like waterboard people over in Guantanamo Bay. Yeah, that area. Those people, I'm certain that a certain amount of them thoroughly enjoy it. But I want to say a big part of that, the reason why any of that happens, is to get to a desired outcome, to find out some sort of information. So I think it's not just sadism. It is sadism often enough, very
Well,
often
so
enough.
we're gonna dive, of course, into and like why people do things, and I don't really plan to dive into like the methods of torture. Those are well like out there. You can find them anywhere. Methods of torture aside, we've talked about what is torture, and we've already alluded that later we're going to talk about why are we uncomfortable with it. We're going to talk about what Trevor was saying. In what situations would we finally condone torture? And of course, what I want to talk about most of all, this wrestles with the definition of torture. Why are we okay with it for some people and not others? All right, but for now, I want to ask y'all your opinion on, did people in the past have have less of an empathy response? Okay, so the viewer as well, I want you to ask yourself, a couple of things. All right, one, are we more or less genetically the same as our ancestors? All right, the science is very clear on this, the data and all that. We are. We're just about genetically the same as we have been for a while. Okay, so if there are no biological differences between us, why did people used to really like attending a cat burning? That was the one that Sam Harris put forward in his book End of Faith. But why did people like going out of their homes and spending time and going to the town square to attend a cat burning, like a circus performance, like they put them in a bag and just burn them? Why did they do that? Why did the Spaniards dash kids against the rock after baptizing them? I mean, like, did they have less of an empathy response, or what? And again, I'd like to maybe start with Bray. I want to hear what Bray has to say about this one for sure. And Bray's
he
I
is
was
muted.
muted for a second.
There he is.
There you go.
Very good.
Yeah, so I would say probably no. I don't think that it has anything to do with people having less of an empathy response. And instinctually, I think my first piece of evidence I would probably point to is just literature. And that sounds a little random, but I mean, you can find consistent themes of empathy and moral values that we still hold today all throughout history. They may take slightly different shapes and forms, but I mean, you'll still find, like the tragedy of a soldier, a young boy being sent out to fight a battle, and their family being distraught when he comes home deceased or doesn't come home at all, or people who are executed in a public square. It isn't everybody's not just standing there going hip hip hooray. There are those who have always been perhaps not the majority that have thought differently.
Sure.
It's actually one of the reasons I'm excited to read this book that I just bought. It's called Doubt, A History, and I've kind of been skimming it, and I think a lot of it might be in that kind of ballpark, whereas like these sort of people who were counterculture or
Raising big questions throughout history.
Exactly. I think a lot of those are moral questions. I think my answer would be a lot of that is social conditioning, and that people are just, you can see that today in any kind of like more closed social group. Sometimes it's easier to see, but if you are, I was literally just thinking about this the other day because somebody was talking to me about Mormons, and then actually this morning I saw a post about one of those poking fun at Mormonism, like somebody wrote Jesus fanfic like however long ago, and now millions of people believe it. Like, can you really believe that that's the case? And I just kind of sit there and I'm like, I have to believe that, or I have to think that these people really had no other choice than to just be born in a Mormon community and be taught this, and that's what they believe, even if it seems so ridiculous to a lot of people on the outside. And so I think I definitely think, like Trevor said earlier, we have our own versions of perhaps gratuitous violence or gratuitous enjoyment of violent depictions or torturous applications. But I think our morals have evolved today to where we no longer would consider something like the Roman Colosseum or something to be something of value to us. Although
So,
we do
just
gather
like
on
quickly,
Saturday nights and watch people beat the
I was
shit
gonna say
out of each other.
MMA is pretty imminent. Yeah.
Right. That's what. Yeah, that's what I mean to
I
say.
want to open the floor to Trevor and Michael for sure to talk about what Bray just said. What does it exactly mean in our society, or even on a personal level, when Bray brings up a turn of phrase which we have heard before over and over again? Our morals have evolved. What does that mean? At the end of the day, what does that mean?
Well, first, I don't really think our morals. It's not just one sentence. Our morals have evolved. I think people haven't really changed in the truest sense of the term. They have.
Biologically,
They
they
have.
haven't. Biologically, they have not.
So there's quite the gray area here. It's like it's like the nature versus nurture debate. You're going to find leverage for both, and I think we should spend some time kind of elaborating what this whole conversation is about. The evolution of morality, or the alteration, the perturbations of morality. So
Or
I think there.
oscillations, back and forth.
Yes, certainly, and you can see that now. Well, first up, I will say you do see quite a lot of ultra violence right now. Those of you who are listening to this, you can pause this video. They just did. Everyone else, you can pause. You can pause this video and pull up a video on something ultra violent, like in the less visited way, like quite literal ultra violence. Like you can go find videos of like police cams of people being undergoing very terrible suffering. You can find those right now, and there are people that consume that. I don't think very many people well, I don't know. I mean, I have to go check a statistic, but I don't think by and large our cultural context is made up of a milieu of people that do that, or a lot of people that do that. But nevertheless, it does happen. But what we do see quite a lot of that people do consume that I do think is makes me question the idea that our morality has or our proclivity for violence has changed. Maybe our morality has changed, but our proclivity for violence hasn't changed. Is just watching any films at all. Go watch a Tarantino movie. I mean, that is wanton ultra violence. It's not real ultra violence, which allows us for to consume it and laugh and giggle and point as a lady gets a in the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood movie. I love, by the way, I love that movie. When that woman gets hit in the face with a can of beans, where her face just detonates and caves inward. You know, I don't watch it. Okay, maybe I do watch it for that scene, but I'm just being funny. I swear.
Look, I mean,
Okay.
cult members
But I do
dying
mean
is
to say
nothing
that.
to be ashamed of, you know?
So I do mean to say though that the human proclivity for ultra violence, like just the rise in the blood temperature to like see it, I think is there. The context from which we see it now has changed. I do believe that that's different. But no, due to the fact that you can watch it and go, well, this isn't real. That you can't quite say that in a Coliseum now, can you? You can't quite say that in a cat burning, which I've never heard of before. But
That makes
nevertheless,
It was bizarre.
yeah,
Go ahead, Mike.
very strange. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I grew up in a house where my dad liked to watch Cops. He was a big fan of that, and I've found out in later years he definitely watches videos on LiveLeak that his friends send him. And you know, I've never really engaged with that part of the internet. I'm very online. I'm extremely online. I've completely avoided that
Chronically.
kind of stuff. Chronically, terminally so, and I've more or less avoided all of that. I've gotten hit with a spare image or two over the years. I would, if you want to pull media into it, I've had thoughts about this on media. There are depictions of violence. So the word ultraviolence, I believe, was coined by Kubrick in Clockwork Orange.
I love that movie also.
I still haven't seen that one actually.
That one's a good
Uh,
one.
But so when we talk about violence, especially in film, there was an entire segment of, it was either in the 60s, 70s, sometime in that era, of Italian filmographers who were making these films. I think they're called Garo films. They're extremely good practical effects of people getting like cut into, stabbed, chopped, whatever.
Mutilated.
And a really good example of this is Suspiria, 19 whenever.
I believe I've seen that. Yeah.
The original one, not the newer one, although the newer one is also pretty good in that vein. But yeah, so that you have this element of, okay, in media, is the violence being portrayed? It's one of three things. It's either being portrayed pretty accurately in a way that like makes you feel bad and there's no like enjoyment here. It's just like, Jesus Christ. Then there's like the Tarantino-esque kind of thing where it's like, honestly, I don't like Tarantino films. I respect his ability to create the atmosphere that he creates, but I think his shit's fucked up. Like,
Michael,
Very often
fundamentally,
it
I
is,
think
yeah.
this guy is
wait.
fucked.
So look, for real, you know, as I've grown older, like the Tarantino movies, they hold less magic for me. And like Keegan, you know, the man I live with, like hates Tarantino, hates him.
I don't like him.
And look, what I'm trying to say is that you are justified, all right? Because like on second watching, Kill Bill is probably his best movie because Uma had such a big hand in it. You know what I mean? And I don't know.
Yeah, so there's violence where it's like it's a good portrayal. There's violence where like it's fetishistic, which is that one. And the third kind, I don't particularly have any that I want to name drop here, but you can certainly find these. It's films where somebody's like, I'm going to shove your nose in this.
Mm.
I am
Mhm.
going to portray a scene that goes on for 9 minutes or whatever
Like
of
the
just
Saw
one
movies,
person.
for example.
Yeah,
Like after they stopped making
somehow
sense
that's
type of thing.
worse. I don't know. Somehow that's worse because they're not even. It doesn't even feel fetishistic at a point. It's just like, why?
But like you begin to ask the question, like you're sitting in the theater, or you're sitting at home, and we've all done this before. At least I have. I feel like everyone's done it, where you start going, "What am I watching?"
Yeah.
And
Star Wars: The Last Jedi.
That was torture. That was torture.
That's a whole different thing. Yeah.
But I
no.
know what you mean, Michael, and I think excuse me, the viewer knows that too. Like sitting down and watching like a horror film, and then like something just kind of stupid and irrelevant happens, but it's like gory, and you begin asking the big question: Why am I watching this? You know.
Yeah.
I think the short, I can't answer exactly why, other than you, in some sense, enjoy it.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
usually
but
walk out. You know.
No, I
Huh?
like a very like not gore heavy. I'm not super into slashers, but unless they're like campy, so like Nightmare on Elm Street works. It's
Yeah.
just so campy. I can't. You don't really take it
That
fully
makes sense.
seriously.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, to go back to the center of it, though, I think this does all address the same fundamental question. Although the question being morality evolving and that notion, and like, are we different from all of the generations before in some way? Have we evolved in some way? I think at the end of the day, human beings, by and large, have not. In the terms of what they consume, like in terms of like what is literally being exposed to you, in terms of what it is you see, I don't think that's changed. I think the proclivity for people to see ultraviolence is present evermore, and perhaps is actually quite higher than the average like Roman civilian or person during the
I
Middle
want
Ages or
to
any of these things.
I want to change the question a little bit for you, Trevor. I'm going to put forward not really an argument, but maybe just like an axiom or two, and I want you to try and pull it apart. Okay? If humans are biologically the same as they have been for a while, if humans have lost most of their instincts through evolutionary time, if these two are true, is violence and the love of violence a learned behavior?
Well,
Or we could even make it a claim. If these are too true, then violence and the love of violence is learned.
the thing is, so this is a nature versus nurture question.
Try to
It
avoid that
is.
pitfall if you can.
I cannot.
It can be done.
Not by me. So first off, I'm not
Uh,
an evolutionary biologist. I
True.
can't speak too
Neither am I.
much. I can tell you, there are areas. So let's have this conversation really briefly, because this is kind of a neuroscience question in a sense. Like how are you wired?
Mhm.
And like, can you be wired? Are people nowadays? Here's your first statement. Are people nowadays um, unlearned, or like they lack the proclivity for ultraviolence, but then they learn it and then have this ability? So that's this one ability. That's that one aspect of it. Or the other way, are people wired from birth to have a certain proclivity for violence? Not everyone, but a certain proportion of the population have some proclivity for violence. And you won't be able to parse the peas from the porridge here, the nature from the nurture. It's
Let
just far
me
too complicated.
let me kind of put all that together in a way I think everyone can understand. Of course, there's going to be variation. Of course, there's going to be variation in the amount of like violence, people would like to do or see.
So I think that kind of answers your own question there. I think you necessarily won't be able to separate from people uh, that feedback loop. How some people have wanton violence somewhere, I suppose, in their nature. Like I can't help it. No, I'm not going to bring that up. It's gross. But I can't help but think of all sorts of cases where people have had this proclivity for some sort of strange disorder, some sort of strange psychological effect that was due essentially to a peculiarity in the wiring of their brain. Where, like, I believe, what's his name? Something Dahmer. He's the guy who ate people.
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey Dahmer. He had a he was quite literally attracted to like organs, like looking at like he looked at like fish organs when they were being like cut open by his father when he was a kid, and like he had like a attraction to it. It's really quite gross, and you can ascribe it in a sense to some sort of mistaken wiring. which you could take as a almost sort of kind of a nature debate. But at the same time, it's far too complicated because these things are developing and changing all the time. Like the wiring of
Right.
your brain, it's constant, it's constant, it's constant. The weights that connect your
And it
neurons
grows.
together is changing all the time. So this is one of those things where um, the nature versus nurture debate about anything, and it happens in every field that involves itself with humans or animals or any such living thing, will constantly tear and bicker at each other, but you won't be able to actually, most of the time, derive a useful answer to the question because it is both. And there's a feedback loop between them constantly. It's why things evolve in the first place. You have a proclivity for doing something, and then like things will continue through the generations, and it just goes on and on and on. It's all part of one larger process that where one arrow and the other arrow that point to each other are far too in each other to be able to parse apart an answer to your question. Um, and also, I don't necessarily know if people today aren't born with this innate want for violence, at least a certain amount of people, like sadists. We could say that if there are some people who are born where like their amygdalas are for whatever reason, like not wired properly with the rest of like their temporal lobe and that whole area of the brain, which can affect your ability to have empathy or something like that. I don't know that for certain, but that's one possibility that could lead to some
And I
sort of
know what you
sadism,
mean. And there's a level of
which could be,
complication. There's a
yes.
level of complication on top of this where, like, you don't want to call certain things like a condition or a disease. It might be normal.
Well,
You know,
normal is a weird term here because evolution is simply tinkering.
average.
It's simply, yes. So, okay, so average, but who cares? My point about this is, well, who cares about the average? Me, I care.
Average
I
within
want
one
there.
standard deviation.
All
I'll
right,
do
all right.
whatever. I'll
Right, but
constrain
why
it to
care
whatever we
about?
have to.
But like it's you that's doing it is my point. And like I don't really see right now. I'm trying to
Right, but
talk about.
this isn't a quantum effect. Like we're talking about data, and that's all I mean.
Right. So the thing I'm trying to argue for here is so narcissists exist. They're around us. They're among us.
Right, and they exist
They're
on a kind of spectrum. They have to.
Yeah, they do. And like I don't like narcissists. I wish the world had less narcissists. That whole I can tell you all these things. But it's hard to say that somebody was born wrong by being a narcissist or the brain was
Exactly.
wired incorrectly because quite literally evolution is just tinkering. Like is a dodo bird who are now extinct that were born with the inability to fly due to evolution and living on an island without any predators, they lost the ability of flight apparently. Were they born, all of them, the entire species, born incorrectly? Or is it that they were tinkered and
Yeah.
changed? And the same thing's true for narcissists and sadists and all of
But
these things.
that's quite the leap. And so like the next kind of like obvious question. I say obvious because like once it was put in so many words, it seemed so obvious, right? Was if we're not okay with torture, why are we okay with collateral? All right. And so, we've been talking about like how there's variation in things and so on. Well, one of these kind of things, one of these kind of variations might be an illusion. All right. So for those of us who are, listening in and whatever, we're talking about torturing someone versus dropping a bomb in a city and at a target individual or at a target military group, but others are going to be involved. Non-military personnel are going to be involved in conflicts on the scale to which we now portray them. So why as a society are we very comfortable with collateral and uncomfortable with torture? I'd like to hear Michael first.
Okay. I just want to let you know that I very briefly touched on the American Pragmatists in my last week read over of things, so I can tell you the term collateral damage, I think that came out of Bush era, right? Or is that
Certainly.
maybe a little bit little bit before that, but
Make an
somewhere around that
educated
time.
guess.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, let's be safe and call it the Reagan era. You know,
So I would almost blame that on American pragmatism of like, well, we need to do X because we need Y, and that's the end of the story. And oh well. And so I think when you say why are we okay with collateral, I think most people actually they're just eating PR about it from the
exactly.
newscasters.
Mhm.
You can't tell me like most people would actually say like, well, okay, I gotta kill all my cows now because one of them bit me. I'm really
Right.
mad about that. I'm just gonna have to kill all my cows now.
I knew I should have asked you about this first because like you're putting it into words everyone can understand about how silly this is. You know, like don't get me wrong, like to call collateral silly, you know, that's not what I'm trying to do here. But the situation you just pointed out is silly.
I have a lot of misgivings about Bush era war justifications. And people have written books about that, and I would certainly say like the fact that the military industrial complex is so well cemented really kind of gave an excuse from a behind the scenes kind of motivation to throw everything at the wall to get rid of the whole wall, even though there was just like a thing of spaghetti on the wall.
Right.
Um, yeah, I collateral damage is a politicking term. I don't.
It's a very convenient word, isn't it?
It's a word that lets you say I'm going to carpet bomb something. It says
Right.
I'm going to throw excessive force onto an object or an area
Like
and be good with
you
it.
wonder if like the people who are making these decisions end up with like a percentage number. Are we okay with 5% collateral?
That's absolutely
Or
what they're juggling because
yeah,
what that
exactly.
filters down into is PR considerations.
And other, you know, even financial claims, you know.
They probably have precedents, although that may not even come into play. Most people don't think about things that deeply. Um,
So, you know, the question becomes if we're okay with a certain amount of collateral, why aren't we okay with at least that much torture? I mean, for example, if we
well, we were
wanted,
right.
well, true, but
Guantanamo Bay, I believe, was
So
also a
y-
I
Bush
want
era.
I want to I want to put together this with obviously modern times. Okay,
Sure.
so and then that will lead into our next question about this. But for now, let's say that the people in charge are okay with a certain X% of collateral for most military engagements or whatever. Those are completely lawful transactions or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm trying to say is that why isn't the justice system then okay with that same X amount of torture? For example, if a serial killer is withholding information, why not try torture? To quote Sam Harris again, he brought up most of you are probably aware of the fact that torture doesn't produce very good information, but it's still something. It's still some information rather than nothing.
Right. This is why I think part of what I mentioned earlier about how my use of the word necessity was going to help us later is that
I agree.
um, you can consider like, oh, we have a militant group that's been hiding out in these heavily urban civilized areas, like full of people who are non-combatants and have absolutely nothing to do with any sort of strategic military action whatsoever. Um, is it necessary for us to carpet bomb this densely populated urban area in order to achieve our goals? Can we achieve this through other means, or is it just easier, more efficient, and more convenient for us to just bomb the shit out of everybody or forcibly remove the local population entirely or any number of actions? Just like, is it necessary for us to torture this serial killer in order to extract the information? Like, is this actually going to achieve the goals that we're looking for? In some cases, maybe yes. In some cases, maybe no.
So
but I
at this
think,
point, Bray, and I want you to continue to talk about this, especially. Sam Harris brought up, what if there was a pill, a single pill, that, when taken, would introduce you to the most violent, most grotesque hallucinations ever? This is obviously a magic pill. And then after which, say an hour, you would resume consciousness and tell the truth and nothing but the truth. Or would we not use that pill on that serial killer?
Well, okay. We're kind of entering into a different
I can tell you
conversation.
about some research, Kims. I actually want to get back to Trevor. What's the general thing you want to point out?
I wanted to point out the separation. I think that might be important between like domestic and foreign
That's what I wanted
policy.
to dig into too. Yeah,
Because I think there's a big
nice.
difference here.
there
Because
is a big difference.
yeah,
Go
There
ahead. I want to hear
exists
your
a
bit.
bit difference, but should there be a difference?
See, that's a great
Seriously.
question. That's a great
in
question.
terms of what direction, yeah. So it is a very interesting question because I think the intuition we have on like American citizens is quite straightforward. No torture, no collateral damage. If there's like a hut or like a cabin in the woods in like Arkansas, and like this guy, I mean, like the ATF has done this. I mean, you can go look into the history of that. But
They
they'll be
shoot
like,
the
hey,
dog. And
they shoot the dog, and then like they're actually records. It's really sad. This is right before what happened in Waco. They like I want to get the history totally right, but basically this guy, like his son was shot and then he was shot and was very sad. So anyway, but ideologically, in terms of like our actual intuitive sense of what the country does and doesn't stand for, the domestic policy is that we can't do those two things: no collateral, no torture. Like there's that,
But
and then
no-
on a
no
foreign
collateral.
policy perspective,
But
I'm
no
reminded of
collateral doesn't make
Hills.
sense. No collateral makes no sense on the domestic front. Like, people are still shot by even cops in this country.
But not intentionally or not
How do
ideologically
you know?
focused.
And Mr. Qualia, how do you know?
Well, these people, you're absolutely right, but like these people would be in trouble if it was discovered. If you know what
Would
I'm
they?
saying.
Can I mention
Would they all the time?
the
Yeah.
changes in
Well,
yeah,
police
Michael.
ideology circa Bush era?
We got another point for Bush.
Okay, what is 3 for Bush?
yeah, three.
There's a
And can I
particular
mention-
individual whose name I've never memorized, but I'm aware of his existence. He's like this like middle-aged, silver-haired, crew-cut fellow, and he is single-handedly responsible for the current shoot first, ask questions later kind of fear whoever you're coming up against ideology within the police force. He trickled down from the, I want to say, federal level into being an influence nationwide. I don't know much more than that, but I do know there's like a figurehead who's like responsible for that whole fucking mess.
Extremely
Michael,
unfortunate.
I want to believe you, right? But I'm afraid some dude I know isn't gonna cut in.
Sure. Let me.
And then the real question is, was
If you give me,
that
like,
guy
20
born
seconds.
that way, or was he? And I also just have to plug in here for the shits and giggles that a very applicable quote somewhere in this conversation would be that the United States does not negotiate with terrorists. And I feel like that we should just nickname this episode the Bush episode because it just seems to keep coming back around.
Well, but there's a reason, Bray. I mean, so like at least these thoughts began in me as a result of reading End of Faith.
Right, I know
And
you mentioned earlier.
that was
For
dated
anybody
for
who's
this-
not aware,
yeah.
that book was published shortly after. I'm not sure how long,
like a
but
year
it was
after 9/11,
within
I
like
thought.
And we're-
within.
Yeah. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to briefly mention, like, I think one level of nuance we should like pepper in here is that this really, really, really does change based on a societal level. I mean, the Soviet Union, I mean, forget about it. You want to talk about like domestic torture? Yes. China is certainly not like current like communist party, certainly. United States, yes, as well. In terms of, I mean, what is Guantanamo Bay except for a place where you can do legal torture? Essentially,
Exactly.
that's the entire point of the place. It's technically not part of like the of the structure of the United States, which allows us to get away with things that take place there from a legal standpoint. It's the entire point of the existence of that place. It's sort of a release valve for us to do torture whenever we feel like we want to. I was going to say need to, but that's a different conversation entirely.
Sure.
That's quite prescient,
Yes.
actually.
So I also want to bring up Stefan, like you brought up earlier, like I was saying, like what is domestically acceptable and like collateral damage and torture or not. And you said, how do you know that? Or like, why do you think that? Or aren't there case examples against it? I think that there are case examples against it. I think police officers get away with horrible things all the time, as well as other people. Everyone, there are people getting away with things. However, I would argue that it is still ideologically centered as something you cannot do in the United States very clearly, due to the fact that if you had a video of a police officer doing something quite heinous, then you would make a lot of money. So I do think I do believe from a domestic standpoint it is against against the basic precept of the Constitution and all the laws that spring from it. Foreign policy is interesting because I did bring up that axis of foreign versus domestic policy, and I do believe that
Right.
by and large Americans really care much less about torture and collateral damage in a foreign policy perspective, obviously. But nevertheless, there is
Because
still
of a
some.
lack of imagination only.
Please expand.
So like if an American, believes that torture is not acceptable at home, domestically, the word you said, and that same American believes that torturing of foreign parties is okay, then they have a lack of imagination only. That they can't put themselves into the place of the person who just happened to not be born on U.S. soil.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you're. So
Like, are we so deluded to believe that if we plucked one random person out of the United States and one random person from Russia, or Iran or whatever, some other terrorist hotbed, blah 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 blah, are we really expected to believe that these two people are that different? Are we expected to believe that one of these had no mother?
Right.
no, I definitely feel the weight of
This
your question. Yes.
Yeah. Well, this is something I was trying to think of earlier, trying to think of how to fit it into the conversation. But when we were talking about why are we okay with collateral and talking, and Michael was mentioning, sometimes this is really what people are doing in these, I guess military institutions is
They get
coming
it
up with
down
these
to numbers.
calculations of but it's almost like if you picked somebody up off the street and asked them, hey, if you knew that there was a serial killer in this apartment block or something that was living in this apartment block, and you knew for a fact that they were going to go out and kill again and continue to kill until somebody found them, but you were the only person, I'm kind of making up a bullshit analogy here, but you'll get what I mean, and you were the only person that knew that they were there, and you could do something about it by dropping a bomb on the apartment complex, like, would you do it? And it's like, well, a lot of people would probably say, well, no, despite the fact that the serial killer would still be able to go out and, what people, when confronted on an individual basis, I think don't really jive with the idea of collateral damage, so to speak, quote unquote. You do your best to avoid that if at all possible. And so it just got me to thinking about, like, well, at what point do people really make those kind of decisions? Like,
Right,
how
exactly,
do you...
Bray. So I live in Illinois. Do the same rights and liberties apply to people 2 towns away from me? Probably. I could identify with them, I guess. What about 2 states away from me? And so on. Like where are people expected to draw the line?
Look up.
Sure. Well, I mean, the short answer is either domestically or on a
But it's not simple because we literally made up our borders.
Well, we did,
we
but everything.
literally made them up.
You gotta enforce them, though, man. You gotta enforce them. It's Dave Grossman. His name's Dave Grossman. He got
Aptly
really
named.
big. He got really big Bush era. He kind of rode the 9/11 thing, and his stuff is actually called Killology.
Oh goodness!
All right,
Oh.
that's great.
Sounds
So-
biblical.
Yeah. Really briefly, so we've been touching on we've been wrapping ourselves around collateral damage and torture
True.
here. But I wanted to briefly mention, so we don't have clear answers as to the acceptability or the rejectability of either one of those terms. Even looking at it from a domestic or foreign policy standpoint. I mean, I really want to lean into that point about domestic versus foreign and that there is a difference. However, I will
one.
say I kind of do. If we talk about like conflict, if we talk about like war, let's go back to like 1942, for example, and the situation that the Earth was in at that time period. You can stretch these terms and see them from a very different light in terms of like just or unjust war. You know, like World War
Mhm.
II versus potentially the war in Iraq. Another conversation for another day. You can have these conversations and explore them, and I suspect I could bend you, all three of you, to seeing acceptable versions of collateral damage as well as torture. I could come up with examples where, like, quite literally, all four of us would have to admit that is an acceptable qualification for torture. And
I think
even
that's the
that is an
point,
acceptable
you know.
qualification for collateral damage, because we wouldn't be talking about this topic if they were so easily disrupted and so easily denied.
Right.
Sure.
That's I think that's a really important aspect of this, and a big part of this whole conversation is just going to be about intuition and acceptability and where we're willing to draw boundaries, because I do think everyone kind of has their shelf, what they're willing to. I think on an intuitive level, this is a question we should have in itself. But on an intuitive level, I think humans, we by and large, don't like torture and don't like the idea of torture. Like, we're not so readily applying it to anybody anywhere at any time, as well as collateral damage. You know,
But
not so readily
that's
applied.
the first thing we talked about, Trevor, is that people used to participate in cat burnings.
But not necessarily to be said, because we participate right now in all sorts of ultra violence. So that's not to say that even people back then were readily able and happy to do wanton violence at any time. It's not like all people across the earth like would get to the cat burning, you know, or would put like. Here's a fact: people used to put like cats they didn't want into a trash bag and threw it into the river. You know, like that happened.
Used to.
People did that.
Yeah,
People do that right
they
now.
Still do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder how many times per day that happens across the earth. But
In
I want to say
Louisiana,
that these
probably a few.
a few, yeah.
We need
There
some
you are.
content warnings on this episode.
Oh well, that's an inescapable bit of collateral damage that you can't avoid on this episode.
Ooh.
But yeah, we can play with collateral with potential examples here where I think we would all accept collateral damage or torture. Like, for
I
example,
think this is so good. I'm really excited because, you know, like next week we're supposed to talk about when is violence necessary. And so this is a really good like precursor to
the last thing I wanted to bring up here, talking specifically about this sort of thing, is that we literally in this society allow the insurance companies to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
We literally allow the insurance companies in this country to figure
Fight
out
Club.
what percent of collateral is acceptable.
That's
Right.
literally the plot of Fight Club.
Are we saying that we're too broke to make those decisions? Are we not human enough to do it because we don't possess enough green paper? I mean, like, these are serious questions, you know?
Some people are more
And
equal than
obviously
others, man.
insurance people aren't torturing people, right? They're not denying their claims on their deathbeds. That's not true, right? Wrong, you know? And so look, this is the last thing I want to talk about, okay? And this could be summed up in again countless examples, okay? But this is a very big challenge for the viewer, you know, and of course for all of us. Why are we okay with torture for some and not for others? All right. For example, why don't we focus on rehabilitation with our criminals? Why are we so hung up on the idea of putting them away in a box they can't get out of, so that they can't contribute to
Puritanism,
society.
American
Say no.
Puritanism.
But look,
It's the
another
Calvinist strain. I'm telling you,
exactly, and so
it's John
like
Calvin every time.
another big example I'd like to bring up, because I would be remiss if I did not. You know, from my personal experience, I mean, living in the Deep South was pain. This is the first episode that I'm not living in the Deep South while I make it, and you know, the systems in place in Louisiana are literally formulated against people like me. That is torture on a prolonged, insufferable scale that somehow I have managed to overcome. And so, like, for real, like why are we okay with certain forms of torture and not others?
This is
because at scale, it's not happening to me.
Yep.
Well, I think
Right.
the part of this
That's
is
the base level.
so there are some assumptions made. This is kind of an epistemic question, a knowledge question, or a conceptual question, the way that we engage with reality. So I think by and large, like the old Christian ethos towards like, I mean, the example you just pulled here, I can't help but like trace it. But like the Christian ethos towards, I don't want to use like a particular example here, but I'm trying to think of a good one that I could use as the placeholder. I don't think I can.
Ray, it seems like
You
you had
looking for-
something important.
Well, I thought back to, and if you find your thought, Trevor, let me know. But I thought back to the episode that we did on the death penalty, which was, I think, was quite a while ago now, huh?
Probably.
And how I think we mostly agreed that the state should not have the sort of right or ability to determine that you should be executed or carry it out. Basically that, or I was going to say determine that you don't deserve it, but I suppose that's a separate thing. And so I thought, can you deserve torture?
That's really what this comes down to, isn't it?
As opposed to doing something and someone saying, well, you should be killed for what you've done. It's like, well, if we say nobody should be killed, or at least put it this way, nobody, let's say that nobody should be killed for an action that they perform, whatever, no matter how heinous, in some, I don't know, morally pure ideal world, where we just have infinite room in a prison for any potential criminal, et cetera, et cetera. Can you still then deserve torture?
Well,
or should
that
you
is
just,
a good
no matter
question
what,
in and of itself, just that little snippet. If Americans are so like willing, and when I say Americans, of course, I mean Deep South Americans, if they're so willing to say that certain criminals need to be killed, then you know what's the issue on torture? You know?
Yeah.
Well,
I go ahead, Trevor.
I was going to say, so this has been developing for a while now with the guillotine, and afterward, like the whole point of a guillotine is like the initial intention was that it was less painful, like it was a quicker way to like end the life over previous methods, whether a chopping block or whatever else. It was considered to be the civilized method, and then everything afterward, whether it be like electric chair or now lethal injection. Like the idea is like a movement towards like civility while still also like committing capital punishment. We can talk about like why we do that. Like why don't we? Because if someone's going to be killed, then obviously like the whole point is suffering. We want them to suffer because like how much time you spend. Like I know in Japan, people who were on the death penalty list, like you don't know when you're going to be killed. You don't know. They just like one day they walk you to the place. Like one day, all right, get up, walk over here. And you walk in, you sit down, and you're like, and that's it. And there's something torturous there. We want you to feel scared. We want you to feel worried.
We don't know. We want you to not know when it's coming.
Yes, because and there's torture in the other way too. Like in 14 days you will be dead.
Right.
So that's also a torture. But I think the whole point is to inflict suffering. Like we want you to suffer, And what's strange about it is, like all of this sounds profane and quite awful, but we can come up with some people right now that the four of us would like shrug and go, I want that. I hate this person. This person is terrible, terrible representation of reality. And I feel shame for having existed in a similar space to this man or
That I
perhaps even
belong
this
to the
woman.
same species, Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
it disgraces me. We could come up with some such examples. Um, no, I think it's odd. I think at the end of the day, when we come back to the death penalty question, like my opinion hasn't changed on that. That being like, I'm for all sorts of small reasons, I dislike the death penalty. But I think the feeling towards punitive justice versus rehabilitative justice is a conversation we're all having right now, and it's complicated. And I don't think
Right, but remember, I
I'll
did
readily
open it
have an
up as
answer.
well to like I would submit with clarity and with confidence that the systems that we make are torturous to some, and we have allowed that to be like at the margin of our society until recently.
Well, okay. So that's the thing I wanted to talk about earlier. I wanted to bring up this one point because I think it's really important that we kind of engage with the notion that we all perceive reality differently, really differently, from an ideological standpoint. So, a Christian standpoint versus a secular humanist standpoint, there are some tension points that are extremely different. Like, and by tension, so the thing I want to talk about here is, like LGBT, that thing. That whole branch, like the way that a secular humanist engages with LGBT people is very different from like a fundamentalist Christian. Like fundamentally, in terms of uh, like the tension point here is quite simply for a secular humanist, like LGBT people. Quite simply, it's just it's your body, it's your choice, et cetera, et cetera. It's quite straightforward. But for a Christian, like it's not so much torture; it's service to Christ. It's a completely different concept. The
right,
weight
and
the weight in the table.
one of these is worth respect, and one of these is not.
Oh, sure, but you're a secular humanist. It'd be weird if you didn't say that. This is what I mean is, and I agree. But when we talk about like what a Christian actually believes and like what actually all of this is for, and by all of this I mean life, all of this, like what is the point of being alive, and what is the point of our moral values, and why we even do anything, and why do you have children, and why do you adopt, and all of these things, like all of that, the focal point from which we engage with reality is different. It is, and this is a tension point. So, for example, like early Christians, like Paul, for example, he was against, by and large, early on when he first started like his church, was against reproduction because we're all about to go straight to like the resurrection day is upcoming, you know, and like we should all be
Surely it won't
celibate.
take 2,000 years to get here.
No, 2054. We're almost there.
Yep.
But anyway, like the precept then, like he started with that. Then because his whole precept, the earliest Christian precepts, which it still exists today, if you go read Catholic doctrine, for example, and most other forms of Christian doctrine, is this notion that life is sin and we're covered in sin. Everything we do is sinful. And like you can't escape from sin except through grace. And depending on some doctrine, also through, well, you're a secular humanist. We have to let's explore Christianity here because I think it's important to this question. Very important.
I would be so remiss if I didn't say that these imaginary
Please, yeah.
principles based on a deity that is from a long time ago weren't wrong.
You know what?
That's all I'm saying.
Please, then carry on, please. I know. For I won't. Anyway. So this whole perspective, though, just to illustrate it further, and then I'll finish, is this notion that everything is sinful, and like the only reason why you would do anything that's remotely sexual, which has a hint of immorality to it anyway, is for reproduction. It's just that's the whole point in service of Christ, in service of God. That's the Christian ethos, and like everything you do ought to be in the service of the Almighty and in service of Christ. That's the whole perspective. So from a Christian point of view, LGBT, like homosexuality, it's a mistake. It's a category error. It's sin. It's just sinful. Like everything else, everything's sinful. Everything is. But like that is like it's not even procreation.
I want to close that with actually the same way that Sam Harris did in his book about this sort of thing. And he was referring to another great author when he said, "That which is submitted without evidence can be dismissed without it."
That's
So
Christopher Hitchens. Yeah.
I know, Sam Harris literally quoted him in the book, so we
Good.
got like
Yeah.
a 2 for free there. But
Oh.
like my point in the question, and you have explored it very well, is that, and again, the whole point is that these are beliefs that people are going to act on. And so that's really what the whole book was about in the end, was like, are we willing to torture people because their beliefs will not let them rather give up information, or so on. And how much should our beliefs be challenged about inflicting it? And so I want to close today with some like closing remarks. Let Trevor finish his thought and so on, but I want to go first. All right, and let others do as they will. All right, and I've come to a very easy conclusion. I think, a conclusion for now. Let's say that I don't want to waste my personal time torturing other, creatures of any kind. Like I don't want to spend my own personal time torturing humans or any of our cousin creatures. Even beyond mammalia. I mean, like, why would you torture a reptile or anything for that matter? And that's a whole other can of worms. Like, so you could also then ask the very logical question, why eat any of them? But that's for another time, And so, Michael, like I say, you're leftmost on my screen. Final words, and then Bray, and then Trevor.
Torture's just a thing that happens. I don't know what to tell you about it other than, it's a really useful tool sometimes, maybe. I don't know. Statistically, I don't know. Honestly, like, it rubs me wrong. I'll take your phrasing. I personally wouldn't do it.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right.
That's all I got. I just have an individual opinion.
It's a tough thing to chew on, honestly. It's like it does really make one feel like you're stuck in a box.
I was so uncomfortable reading it.
But it's so easy to say I would not, for sake of time, it's so easy to say I would not want to do that personally, and then for Trevor to say, okay, well, Hitler has the entire world hostage, and he just has to tell you where the, or we pull up the Dark Knight thing where he's like, where is it? Where are they? Anything, but
I take it back. I totally do it.
What interests me really, and I'm surprised that it took me this long to find or think of it, and it's something that Trevor said in his last little bit here, and perhaps we can explore next week for the next episode.
They will necessarily tie together,
right? Is it in one part, if we don't allow the death penalty, and we are kind of like, we don't really like torture either, is there any punitive measure that is acceptable when it comes to dealing with criminals? Or is it just strictly rehabilitation? That's one part that I think is another question that we may have touched on in a previous episode a little bit, maybe not sole focus, but I think that deserves some treatment. And then the real thing that I was focused on was kind of taking the idea of torture, and you poked at this a little bit, Stefan, a few times in the episode, of like, what else could be considered torture us? Like, is the fact that like I don't have access to universal health care, or that some of like my quality of life is significantly different from somebody who has far more money than me, even just by virtue of being born into a family with lots of money. Is my existence, my everyday slog through 2 jobs just to do XYZ, when like, for example, people say the money exists to solve world hunger, barring the like actual technical challenge of something that size. Like, the money exists for this. Just like that website you could go to and see Jeff Bezos's net worth visualized. Like the money exists to solve so many problems if we could just get it from people, even by means of taxation. But we don't. And that affects millions and billions of people all over the world.
We could wrap it up into like a sentence by saying, if the resources exist to help all of mankind or humankind, and we don't utilize those resources, is that torture?
Right. Is that not, in one part, inflicting unnecessary suffering and pain upon people? That one seems like a far more easier question to answer than, is it being done with intent? But we can discuss that at another time. But this one's a tough one.
Trevor, last words. And like I said, I mean, reading Into Faith and Sam Harris, like bringing this up, like at first I thought it was so bizarre he was bringing it up. And then I figured out, no, it's really not. It belongs in that book. It was so uncomfortable, and I just hope everyone else has been as uncomfortable as me, but Trevor, last words?
Oh, yeah. So, we were talking a moment ago, like Michael and Bray both open with this, that they would choose not to torture and not to inflict collateral damage. I'm going to also assume.
I recanted on that.
Except on my land.
Yeah, Michael recanted that.
I thought about it a little bit harder.
Well, wait a second.
Yeah, so I was going to briefly say that I hope I wouldn't, but I know I would, if that makes sense. That's
I wouldn't do it with a smile on my face, if that's what you're implying.
I hope I wouldn't, and in reference to what you just said, Michael, I hope I wouldn't, and perhaps I would. Like that's the
hardest choices require the strongest.
Oh yeah. I just mean to say that these things are complicated. Like I can't really separate myself from my situation entirely because that's complicated. Like I work as like
you are part of your situation.
Yeah. Like I work in a research lab and I like walk to work and then I come back home and that kind of thing. So I don't really have opportunity to be thinking in that context. Like my whole life is just being nice to people and they're nice to me. And that's the full extent of my engagement with people right now in this period of my life. So I don't understand and don't regard and interact with torture or collateral damage or any of these such things on a day-by-day basis. So it's hard for me to conceptualize myself doing these things. It's not how I engage with reality.
Maybe it's a learned behavior.
But well, sometimes it's also a fear behavior. Like we get into that again, but. I can't imagine some periods of the earth that like me, myself, like right now, me, having worked in the career I've worked in, had the education I received, everything about me is the exact same. You teleport me like, and then I go into some other time period, the future or the past, where I believe that either my life or the life of my loved ones, if they came with me, were threatened. There's all sorts of things that I'm capable of. And I'm not saying this to like boast at all. I'm the exact opposite. I just mean to bring to awareness the notion, the fact that you are capable of a lot. Like you have potential. You really do have potential. All of you, everyone listening, everyone here currently on the episode, you have raw total potential to do really anything. And
do a lot of evil.
Yes. To do a lot of great things, beautiful things, change the world in so many great ways, and also really to just to do so much harm, to do so much harm to so many people. This is completely, totally possible, and I think it's really important going into any conversation is to recognize that in yourself, and to recognize that deep beating, nasty thing that's that comes with the package of being a human being. And to recognize that as you ask this question, I wanted to bring up the Fermi paradox towards the end to be funny, and then I'll end. Just the notion, the Fermi paradox, like we talked about this in the past, is the notion that, why aren't there alien planets all over the galaxy, or like why haven't we seen any yet? And one of the answers to the Fermi paradox is, well, any civilization once it gets to a certain point may just destroy itself like utterly. Like the entire planet can just die from like once this civilization gets sufficiently advanced, like something happens and then everyone dies. And like we could end up, let's say, and this is me trying to buttress and create a scenario where you would be for collateral damage, where and torture, uh, where like let's wrap it up in one package, where you have a mad scientist who's like currently making a bacteria or a virus that is designed to replicate itself, or like making gray goo, for example. That idea of like just something that just eats biomass and replicates itself. He invented it, he created it, and he's laughing maniacally, and he says that we're all about to go into a spaceship behind the moon after like we all get eaten up by this thing. Like a crazy person, let's say way into the future, could easily manufacture such a thing as we get more and more advanced. That could be a solution to the Fermi paradox. And let's say you have this guy and you need to find out where his lab is, so you have to
Trevor.
torture him, or you could destroy the entire Earth. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of talking off my head. Either way.
No, I'm eating this up.
Yeah. Either way, that's my closer. Yeah, I could justify all sorts of things.
True. And, what Trevor was, I know what Trevor's trying to say there. Sorry,
Yeah.
but, the truth is that in Trump's America, any one of us could be a Nazi. And that's where we'll stop.
Very good.
We're all capable of these things, and we have to watch how we treat others. You have to, it's not a choice anymore. We live in a society too wrapped up with each other to say anything else, frankly.
Sure.
And it's important. That's why we do this. Talk it out. It's important, and so you should engage too. Those of us who are still listening, make sure you engage with the topic. That's how you learn. All right.
Very nice. All right. Well,
Lovely.
yeah. I guess I should probably end it there. Y'all have a wonderful time. See you next week.
You too.
All righty, everybody.